What's up, everybody? Welcome back to my channel. We are back. It's football season again. Week 1 has just finished, and we're going to look at the early waiver wire pickups for Week 2. We're going to recap Week 1, and I'm also going to talk some buy and sell candidates as well. So if you're interested in more content like this, please subscribe to my channel. I make a wide variety of content, fantasy football, as well as other stuff that you can check out in the description below. So I'm going to do this by position. I'm going to talk first quarterbacks. I'm going to go through pickups, guys to drop, buy, sell, etc. And then I'm going to do that same thing, running back, wide receiver, and tight end. And I'll touch on defense a little bit at the end. So starting at the quarterback position, we got the top ranked positions here. This is in a standard scoring formats. 6 points for a rushing or receiving touchdown, and then quarterback throws are for 4 points. Number 1 quarterback in the week, Josh Allen, no surprise there. The big pickup this week, who may not be rostered in a lot of leagues, is Baker Mayfield. Baker Mayfield, rostered in 34% of leagues per ESPN. This is in the typical 10-team format. So great player to pick up. He's got an excellent stretch for the next 4 games. You look at Baker Mayfield's schedule that he has coming up. He's got Detroit, Denver, and Philadelphia, which are all very passable defenses that I could see him doing very well against. And then in Week 17, he's got Carolina. So this is potentially a quarterback that has a fringe top 10 value. And if you want to hold on to him all the way until the playoffs, let's say you have Jordan Love and you need a replacement, this is not a bad option to look at. I think Baker Mayfield is going to have a great season. He's got great rapport with Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, and he showed that today. The one thing I would say is that you're not going to get performances like this all the time. The Commanders are a really bad defense, but still, you really like what you saw from Baker Mayfield today, and if he's out there on waivers, I think he's got to be your number 1 pickup. Some other guys to look at as well are Geno Smith. I think he's still going to be pretty solid again this season. He's generally hanging out on waivers as well. 14% rostered in 10-team leagues on ESPN. So that's a very good option as well for you. Not as much into guys like Derek Carr as much. I think that was just a product of the Panthers being so terrible, and they don't really have the amount of weapons that the Bucks do. So I think if you're going to go with quarterbacks, I would go Mayfield and then Geno Smith. So who are guys that you can drop among the quarterback position? And this may be a controversial take, but I would, if you need to drop a quarterback, Justin Herbert is a droppable quarterback if you're especially in 1 quarterback leagues. Yeah, I think based on the formula you saw today, like Jim Harbaugh is going to be running the ball. He's going to play smash mouth football. No real receiver standouts on this team except for Ladd McConkey was their leading receiver, for lack of better words. But for the most part, this team is not going to be the pass-happy team that you've seen with Brandon Staley. Totally different feel on this Chargers team. And I think this is going to be the formula you see. Justin Herbert that we're accustomed to seeing, not going to be there. So if you drafted him in hopes that, maybe you're getting a buy low, I think that if you have to pick between Baker Mayfield and Justin Herbert, I think you have to go Mayfield right now. And if that involves dropping Justin Herbert, I think that's the move you have to make. Buy and sell candidates at quarterback. So the quarterback that I would be trying to buy, my number 1 quarterback on the season, if you can get him, is Jalen Hurts. And I know that Jalen Hurts, you'd have to really give up a haul to get him. But I think that today was on Friday was an example of how, it was a game in which it was skewed towards Saquon Barkley getting a lot of those rushing touchdowns. It's not always going to be the case. Jalen Hurts is going to get more involved. He's going to get some more of those 1-yard sneaks. As the season goes along, remember the Eagles have to play the Commanders twice. They have to play the Giants twice, 2 teams that did not look very good defensively today. It's going to be there for Hurts. He's going to have some great games moving forward. And if you could give up some options for him like CJ Stroud, I would consider doing that just because of the rushing upside of Jalen Hurts. Other guys that you could consider buying low on, Dak Prescott. I'm not a huge Dak fan for fantasy just because he doesn't really give you much on the ground, but he's going to have games better than this. He scored, just going back over his numbers, he scored 11.46 today. which is not very good, especially considering it was a blowout. But there's not going to be games like this where they can just kind of coast. He doesn't really need to use CeeDee Lamb. They're going to have some games where they're going to need Dak Prescott to cook, and he's going to have better performances. And I think that this is a good time to try to buy him low while you have the opportunity to. Other guys in a similar situation, Caleb Williams. And I know he did not do well today, but I would not trust him as your QB1 if you're going to trade assets for that. But if you're in a situation where you could stash Caleb Williams on your bench for a little while, I think things are going to turn around for him. You can never judge an elite QB prospect by 1 week, and I think that he's going to get better as the season goes along. So this is a good opportunity to try to buy low on him, or even pick him up if somebody does drop him to try to get somebody like Baker, for example. Guys to sell. So this is another potentially controversial take, but Jaden Daniels is a potential sell high candidate. Jaden Daniels, I really like, and you would have to really get a great quarterback if you're going to do this. If you could sell Jaden Daniels for Jalen Hurts, I would consider doing that. I would definitely do that if you had the opportunity to. But getting 2 touchdowns on the day, 2 of them could have been called back. One of them was Brian Robinson almost broke the plane on a receiving touchdown, and then that didn't go through, and Daniels snuck it in. And then you also had a 1-yard sneak, which also came off of Brian Robinson failed 1-yard sneak. So some of those, there's going to be some regression in some of those performances as the season goes along. They're also going to have some stout defenses that they play throughout the season. They got Dallas twice. So if you could sell high on this, a lot of times, like when rookies come in and you don't have anything except this one performance, people could really buy into it and give you a lot for it. So something to consider. If you can grab something for Jaden Daniels, now is the time to do that. And by name value alone, consider selling Patrick Mahomes. Mahomes, a lot of people, there's no disputing that he is one of the best quarterbacks of all time. But in terms of fantasy, it is not the same as it was 4 years ago, even 5-6 years ago at this point, when he had Tyreek Hill and Kelsey in his prime. He does have some good receivers now, and I think that this team is going to be better offensively, but I don't think that you're going to get that top 5 upside. Now that you've got guys like Anthony Richardson, Jaden Daniels, for example, you've got Lamar Jackson, you got these guys that have great rushing floors. Mahomes is not a scrambling quarterback, and if you could sell him off name value alone, let's say you have Mahomes and you have a guy that was, like a Jaden Daniels or like an Anthony Richardson, something like that, a guy that was maybe taken later that you have and you still have Mahomes. Consider selling Mahomes to get a good flex option, and then you can stream the quarterback game. It could be a very good move for you. Now let's go to the running back position. So for running backs, the key guy that really stood out today was J.K. Dobbins. Incredible game. I think this pretty much answered all the questions that we had about him in terms of, how is he going to look after coming back from injuries, and he looked great. He had the clear lead on that backfield as well. So these are just things that you love to see from a guy like that coming into this new situation. And, one of the last picks of the draft, if you stashed him on your team, then you were really happy with the results today. So, yeah, that's the guy to pick up. I think that in terms of how much fab you would spend, I personally do not spend a lot of fab in week 1 because it's a long season. You don't want to overreact to stuff. But based on what I saw from Dobbins, I would be willing to spend up to 20% of fab because this is potentially an RB that you can have throughout the season. The only reason I would not spend more is, 1, as I talked about, you don't want to spend all your fab early. And 2, this guy does have an injury history. So how long is this going to last? We don't necessarily know. But if this is going at based on what I saw today, I think that this is an excellent pickup and the number 1 running back by far on the list. Number 2, Zach Charbonnet. Kenneth Walker injury today. Zach Charbonnet, another guy. And ironically, I talked about in my last video about how drafting Brandon Aubrey versus Zach Charbonnet. Brandon Aubrey had a great game today, by the way. But also, you're potentially getting a starting running back for an extended period of time in Charbonnet. So that's very good considering the volatility of kickers right now. Mattison or Alexander Mattison of Las Vegas had a good game today. He's not as high on my list because he's been kind of an inconsistent player throughout his career, but he is he looked better than Zamir White today. He's more involved in the passing game. I think this is a situation to monitor. It doesn't hurt to stash him. You could probably get him for low fab. It could be great value as the season goes along. Same with Justice Hill. Wouldn't really spend any fab on him, but this is a great pickup to consider as the season goes along for you. Guys that you can drop. So generally with running backs, like don't panic drop some of these guys. Jalen Warren, Chase Brown, guys like that didn't have great performances today. You don't really want to drop some of these guys, but there are guys that I would feel more comfortable dropping given the situation. The guys I want to bring up first are Carolina. That team just looks brutal. I just honestly don't think there's really anybody worth rostering on that team right now except for Xavier Legette, just for upside only. But is there really going to be any and Jonathan Brooks, but he's not playing right now. But Chuba Hubbard and Miles Sanders, I think what they showed you today is that this team is just not going to have opportunities to, one, either run the ball or two, have an effective system. So I think if worse comes to worse, this is a team that you can avoid, and I don't think there's really any harm in dropping either of these guys, even though one of them is going to be an RB1 on a team that is terrible. And then Rico Dowdle is another one to consider dropping. I had a lot of hopes for him, so I was wrong about how the breakdown turned out today. And if it was going to be an opportunity for him to get some work today, it would have been today because they were blowing out the Browns early and he could have had some rushing looks, but it didn't happen for him. I think you got to move on from that if you really need a running back on your team. Guys to buy, Jonathan Taylor. Did not have a good game today. Didn't receive a target, but the Colts only had the ball for about 20 minutes today. So game script is going to change for this team. You're not going to have these Alec Pierce bomb catches that are going to happen throughout the game. That's not going to be the situation for them every week. Jonathan Taylor is going to get more involved. Only 10.8 points today, but it's going to get better for him. I would be happy to try to buy him if you can for a good value. Other guys to consider as well that I'll touch on briefly. As I mentioned, Chase Brown and Jalen Warren. Do not drop these guys, and there's actually a case to potentially buy low on them depending on the situation of what you're giving up, because both of them, I think, will get more involved as the season goes along. Didn't have great performances today. They were also going up against pretty good defenses in terms of the Cincinnati Bengals. And in terms of the Steelers, Warren is coming back from an injury, and maybe the snap load will change. So guys like that, they're kind of in these timeshare situations. You didn't really like the breakdown today, but that could change as the season goes along, and they're good candidates to consider buying low on. Sell high candidates. My number one sell high at running back is Rhamondre Stevenson. This was a anomaly of a game to me. Cincinnati, man, it's just really disappointing how they played today. But 25 carries, 120 and 1. That's not going to happen every week for him. It's just they're going to be a run-heavy team, but you look at their defenses the next 3 weeks, it's pretty rough. They've got Seattle, which just bottled up Javonte Williams, the Jets, and then the 49ers, which are two of the top defenses. So now is the time to try to sell Rhamondre this week. And you know, if you could get Jonathan Taylor for him, that would be a lot, but maybe throw in another volatile flex player who had a good game like Raheed Shaheed and like him and Rhamondre, and then you can get Jonathan Taylor. That's very feasible to me. I think that would be a good candidate to sell high on. Other guys as well. This is also kind of off name value as Derrick Henry. Derrick Henry, I think, he just didn't look the same on Thursday. You could probably get a lot for him on name value. He's going to have some good games from time to time. He was a little bit game scripted the other day, but off name value, I think you can get a haul for Derrick Henry still. Wide receivers. So the wide receivers that I would pick up. So the key with these pass catchers is you want to look at the targets. You don't want to look at the touchdowns. I know experienced fantasy players probably know that, but if you're new and you're watching this channel and you haven't really played fantasy football before, pay attention to the targets and the opportunity. And the number one that I like off of opportunity is Brandin Cooks. The reason being with Cooks is that, there was a kind of a void of a number 2 receiver on this Dallas Cowboys team. They have, CeeDee Lamb, clear number 1. Jake Ferguson was the suspected number 2, but then he got injured. So now you're looking at a void that needs to be filled, and you've got Brandin Cooks with a good performance today. He had a 4 for 40 with 1 touchdown. That in itself is not necessarily great, but 7 targets on a day where they didn't need to throw the ball too much is very good. So I'm very pleased with what I saw from Brandin Cooks, and he's only 29% rostered, so he's out there in a lot of these leagues. I think that he's a guy that I would be willing to spend about 5% of my fab right now. I wouldn't go over that. There's going to be better options, I think, that emerge as the season goes along, but I'm very interested in grabbing Cooks as my number 1. A low fab buy that you can probably get without spending anything is, depending on how big your league is DeVaughn Vele. I hope that's how his name is actually pronounced, but very encouraging game from him for the Broncos. He had 8 receptions on 8 targets, which is a very good breakdown in involvement. You would have liked to see more yards, but that Seahawks defense was really making things difficult for Bo Nix today. And I think as the season goes along, you will see more involvement with him and you'll see more downfield opportunity. So it's very encouraging to me to see a guy like this, especially in PPR leagues, get this many targets and be heavily involved on a team that they need some wide receivers as well. They've got Cortland Sutton, but really a kind of a void after that. And maybe Vele could be a nice sleeper to keep an eye on. Let's check his roster percentage real quick. It's 0.1% in ESPN. So yeah, this is a good option. And if you do need to spend fab, maybe put $1 or 2 in. But this is, I think, somebody that is another good sleeper to keep an eye on. I would personally fade guys like Alec Pierce. Great game today. He was the number, I believe right now he's the number 10 wide receiver from this week. But you're not going to have many 80-yard touchdowns. And the book on this guy is that that's how he plays. He's going to get these bomb catches from time to time. He'll put up some good fantasy performances, but it'll be like 3 for 120 and a touchdown. And then another week it'll be like 1 for 20. So a lot of volatility with him. I would not really spend up on him at all. And same with Raheed Shaheed. It's kind of a very similar situation as well. But don't buy into the hype with Alex Pierce. I would personally not be trying to pick him up on my team. Droppable guys. Josh Palmer. I had high hopes for him, so disappointing game. And he started a fight, got ejected, possible suspension. I think it's safe to drop him right now. Curtis Samuel, who I was very low on, he did not do well today. He's a good drop candidate. Darnell Mooney, a popular sleeper pick that you can get undrafted or in deep leagues, also did not play well today. I think all 3 of those guys are safe to drop. Buy candidates. So as of this recording, the Lions game is not finished, but Amon-Ra St. Brown only had 2.8 fantasy points, and that's got to be easily your number 1 buy candidate among the wide receivers. This guy simply does not put up performances like this. This is a huge anomaly, and if you have a new fantasy football player who doesn't really know Amon-Ra St. Brown well, he would be very disappointed by this week 1 performance and probably sell him. So number 1 guy to pick up, his consistency is going to come back. Rams are just playing a very good defensive game and really making things difficult for Jared Goff today. And then Marvin Harrison Jr., a very disappointing game for his season debut. And, what happens in fantasy is a lot of guys, they panic with performances like this. 1 for 4 in his NFL debut as a rookie. People will already kind of putting the bust label on him, which is pretty ridiculous. So find those managers that are, upset with these performances and try to buy them now, because I think these are guys that can are going to have better performances. This is just an anomaly. Who do you try to sell? Stefon Diggs is number 1 to me. 2 touchdowns today. He did look good today, but it's not going to always work out in that. There's going to be some regression. Tank Dell is going to get more involved as the season goes along. And Diggs getting 2 touchdowns today with that 3-headed wide receiver mix. I just don't see that happening every single week. Another guy with good name value. I think you could really get a haul from Stefon Diggs. Another guy with good name value but didn't have a great performance today is Davante Adams. Davante Adams, to me, you saw today with the breakdown of targets that they're really getting more Brock Bowers involvement. With Gardner Minshew, you're not really getting the deep ball throws to Davante Adams that you typically picture this guy getting with guys like Derek Carr and Aaron Rodgers back in the day. So if you could sell Davante Adams off the name for those 2 guys I talked about, ASB and Marvin Harrison Jr., those are very good plays. And then Jameson Williams is a good example to me of someone who he's having a good game today. Look at his numbers right now because the game is still going on. He has 5 for 121 and 9 targets. So very encouraging to see that from him. But a long touchdown today. This could be a good opportunity if you really are trying to improve your roster, get some of these guys, these elite level players that you could throw in. I think Jameson Williams is a good guy to put into the pot and make available to get an elite player, because I don't foresee games like this happening all the time. I foresee a lot of up and down performances, and really good that he's off to the start. You could potentially use it to your advantage to sell. All right, now we get to the tight ends. Number 1 tight end to pick up, and probably the number 1 on the week, depending on what your team needs, is Isaiah Likely. Excellent performance the other day. Number 1 tight end still on the week. And he, let's look at his final numbers. He had 9 receptions for 111 yards and a touchdown on 12 targets. That's crazy. And it's not going to always be like that. But if a lot of tight ends are just a very tough position to predict. And if the Ravens are going to roll with this 2 tight end thing with Likely and Andrews, it would be better than some of these other options you got out there that are putting up. Like, you look at the performances today, there were only 5 players that scored above 10 points in a full PPR. That's pretty rough. So Isaiah Likely getting 26, I think you want to roll the dice with that. Who would you want to drop for him? If you're in a league that's deep enough to have Cole Kmet, Luke Musgrave, I think those guys got to go. Kmet, I've just never really been that high on. And Musgrave, he's an encouraging tight end prospect, but with Jordan Love's injury, I don't think he's worth holding on to right now. Buy and sell. And another thing real quick with tight ends. These guys that have, really good performances where they, on the week, they score in the top 10, but they're like 2 for 10 with a touchdown. Avoid guys like that. Those are usually flukes, and they're not going to continue that way. So, you look at like Juwan Johnson. You look at Noah Gray having a decent game today. Other guys that manage to find their way into the end zone. There'll be guys like that, like Mo Alley Cox is a good example of someone like that. Avoid performances where you have like 2 for 10 and a touchdown. That's just not a very encouraging sign for tight ends. Guys that you want to buy, pretty much all the top tight ends did poorly on the week except for Brock Bowers. The guys that you would want to try to, and Kyle Pitts too, I'll talk about him in a sec, but guys like Kincaid, Andrews, and Laporta, these are good times to try to buy low on them. Andrews especially, I think that you're not going to see Isaiah Likely dominate the snaps like that, and I think you can get Andrews at a low value that is worth it. And Dalton Kincaid too. He's going to have more involvement as the season goes along than what he had today. Kyle Pitts, speaking of him, he's my sell candidate. And, he had a nice game today. He got a touchdown, but I'm still not convinced that he's a consistent fantasy tight end. You look at his numbers today, and, there's people are all over the place on this guy. I personally am not a fan of him, but I do understand the opinions of why people are high on him. But 3 targets, 3 receptions, 26 yards, and a touchdown. So if you take away that touchdown, then you're looking at a totally different score here. And, this team, this is the opportunity for him. You know, he has everything available for him to be a great tight end this season. They don't have a lot of options on the team. It's really Drake London and Kyle Pitts. They have a new coach. It's more of an offensive-minded coach, but they didn't play well today. So is this turning into an issue with excuses for Kyle Pitts or just the fact that he's just not a good NFL player? So you can get guys out there that will give you a haul for Kyle Pitts just off of the name hype that he's been getting for the last 3 seasons. And I think it's worth exploring that personally, because I am not sold that this is going to be an elite fantasy player moving forward. So if you can get, you know, a better running back, a better wide receiver, if you could switch him for a tight end that I talked about earlier who didn't have a great performance like Mark Andrews, I would do that in a heartbeat. All right, so defenses to look at for next week. The ones that I really like for next week are first the Los Angeles Chargers, because they get the Carolina Panthers, which if you look at how Carolina did today, yeah, it was bad. And I don't think it's going to get any better against the Chargers and Jim Harbaugh. I think he's going to feast on that team. So if they're out there, that's my number 1 defense to pick up. I would even be willing to spend $1 on them, you know, just to make sure you have them, because I think that's going to give you a 20-point performance right there. Another good defense to look at for this next week is the Pittsburgh Steelers. The Steelers next week are going to be playing the Denver Broncos. Struggled today. Pittsburgh looked good against Atlanta. I think Pittsburgh is a defense that surprisingly is still out there in a lot of leagues. And I think that that's a good defense to look at to potentially pick up as well. Ones that I would be more likely fading, despite the good performance this week, is Minnesota, because Minnesota next week plays the 49ers. And yes, they were the number 2 defense on this week, but I don't think they're going to hold up against San Francisco. Well, that's all I've got for this video today. Please consider subscribing if you want to check out more content like this throughout the season. I make a lot of fantasy football videos as well as other content. I'll see you guys next time. Bye.